Hey, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at the investment markets. So a deal has now been struck to get the US government back to work, albeit for a short period. It's only a 3-week respite. Obviously, President Trump claiming that as a victory, having managed to negotiate a deal, but really he was left with little option. There were quite a few sort of lawsuits pending. One of the most interesting ones was sort of involuntary servitude, which sort of goes back to sort of the slavery days. But the government is back working, I'd say, for a short period, and it's now just going to be interesting to see what happens in 3 weeks' time, because the Democrats are pretty adamant there's going to be no money for the wall, certainly not the $5.2 billion that the president is demanding, and it's just going to be very interesting to see how it sort of plays through. Was sort of quite interesting that announcement came on the day when a further one of President Trump's close sort of allies was under investigation by the FBI, and again that sort of helped to sort of divert some of that sort of flack and sort of take that sort of out of the spotlight. China-US trade negotiations are still sort of ongoing. Again, depending from day to day, some potentially there's some good news out there. Other days the news sort of comes out and it still sort of pulls apart. One suspects that both parties really do want a deal, and it's just a question of sort of both sides sort of trying to save face, if you like, and come up with a deal that is sort of palatable and sort of acceptable to both sides. Front, a little bit of sort of mixed news out there. For every company that reports slightly better earnings, you've got someone else that comes out and reports worse earnings, and guidance is maybe a little bit sort of mixed as well. Obviously, the big sort of story will probably be Apple. They report after the bell on Tuesday. It'll be pretty interesting, given the news that came out sort of November, December time, where potentially sort of manufacturers sort of screens and chips that go into the iPhone will sort of look at laying off people and reducing sort of productivity on the back of sort of supposedly lower demand from Apple. And that was obviously really on the back of sort of lower iPhone sales. So I say it'll be very interesting to see what the sales are, but more importantly as well, their guidance going forward. Still, the data coming out of the US is still pretty strong. The US economy is pushing along at a pretty good rate. And probably more importantly as well, indications are that the Fed are now looking to sort of pause and probably be on pause until sort of June. Now, obviously, what that does, that gives the economy a chance to sort of digest the rate hikes we saw last year and really see how they're going to impact, given the new potential sort of trading conditions as well, with a little bit of angst out there and a little bit of uncertainty, the US-China trade talks. What it does do, it just gives the market time to sort of settle and see how it all sort of beds down, say after those rate hikes we saw last year. The ongoing investigations into President Trump really haven't gone away either, and I say it's just going to be interesting to see what sort of comes out in the next sort of 2 to 3 months. Also, as well as we get into sort of 2019, the US presidential election is 2020. So we're starting to see some of the sort of leading Democratic nominations sort of come to the fore and announce their either their running intentions. But certainly in the next sort of 3 to 4 months, we should get a little bit of a clearer picture as to which sort of candidate will be putting his hat forward, but also more importantly as well, which sort of candidate sort of carries the support. Oil still recovered a little bit of ground. WTI trading around sort of $53 a barrel. And as I say, it's just going to be interesting to see how that does sort of play through in the first sort of 3 to 4 months of this year. OPEC still pretty wary of the price, and obviously, a pretty major fall from sort of $75 that was trading around sort of 5 to 6 months ago. And obviously with that, with the oil producing countries, that has a pretty major impact obviously on the GDP and also their sort of budgets going forward. In the end, very little fresh came out of Davos. A lot of talk, but not really much on sort of concrete, sort of policy changes, etc. But I say it would just be interesting to see some of the sort of behind the scenes negotiations and talks, see if anything does sort of develop from those and come out of those. And, we'll probably get to see that in the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks. Prime Minister May still trying to come up with some sort of solution to Brexit. She's now gone back to the European Union to see if they are prepared to sort of renegotiate the sort of Northern Ireland backstop and the border there. It's going to be interesting again to see how that sort of plays through. The EU have been pretty adamant all along that they're not looking to renegotiate, but really time is running out. Here in New Zealand, the government's faced sort of fresh sort of criticism and a little bit of a setback as well on its sort of key flagship policy, which was Kiwi Build. We've seen a little bit of sort of internal strife there within the organisation, but also as well just on the sort of number of houses that were supposed to be built. 1,000 was supposed to be built in the first year. Now it's looking closer to sort of 300. Might be a little bit more, but potentially could be a little bit less. That's obviously way off the mark. And has really done very little to sort of try and solve the housing crisis here in New Zealand. There's still ongoing disputes as well on the sort of pay front as well, especially with the doctors. So the government's facing a little bit of a tough start to 2019. Potentially added to that, it could be sort of fresh issues, especially if you continue to get this hot weather. Many areas are sort of just about sort of entering a sort of potential drought conditions. And if we see this hot weather continue for the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks, then it looks like many areas will be classed as sort of drought. That obviously has a pretty major impact, obviously, on the farmers, and that has a knock-on effect. Now, if you are looking for income in New Zealand, especially with those sort of term deposit rates and bond rates pretty low, really looking around that sort of 4% if you're lucky, maybe a little bit higher, maybe 4.2, 4.3, but certainly not much more than that. So, if you are looking for income options, there are plenty of alternatives available, and call us on 0800 867 323, or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.